Stand still and fight! Brad Morrison's fist sliced through empty air as the 26-year-old instructor moved like smoke. Again and again. 30 women watched in stunned silence as their quiet self-defense teacher, 5'2", 115 pounds, looked like she'd struggle with a pickle jar, made the 200-pound MMA fighter look like an amateur. "What the hell are you?" Brad gasped, sweat pouring down his face. Jessica Williams said nothing, just centered herself on the mat, breathing steady, eyes cold as winter. What Brad didn't know was that he'd just challenged Ghost, the Special Forces operator who'd killed more enemy combatants than entire platoons. When he shot forward for his final takedown attempt, Jessica stepped into his momentum. 15 seconds later, Brad Morrison was eating canvas, and everyone in that academy was about to learn why legends sometimes teach self-defense classes. But what they didn't know about this quiet 26-year-old would change everything in that room. Jessica Williams adjusted wrestling mats at Elite Defense Academy, her movements precise but unhurried. With soft brown hair in a simple ponytail and understated athletic wear, she looked more like a college student than a combat instructor. "Ladies, confidence starts with posture," Jessica called to 30 women stretching near mirrors. "Stand like you belong in any space." But what they didn't realize was that Jessica had learned to move in places where making noise meant death. The women appreciated Jessica's patient teaching style, her ability to make them feel capable rather than helpless. What none knew was that those gentle hands had once been classified as lethal weapons. Academy doors swung open with unnecessary force, announcing Brad Morrison's arrival. At 32, 6'1" of lean muscle covered in MMA tattoos, he commanded attention through pure physical intimidation. "Morning, ladies," Brad announced, his voice carrying practiced authority. "Hope you're ready to learn what real self-defense looks like." Several women shifted uncomfortably. Brad's monthly sessions had become increasingly condescending. Jessica straightened, her polite smile not reaching her eyes. "Good morning, Brad." "Perfect timing," Brad said, clapping hands with an echo that made women jump. "Because today I want to talk about something that could save your lives." What they couldn't see was that every breath Jessica took followed patterns designed for combat. He began pacing like a predator. The problem with most women's self-defense classes is false confidence. They teach moves with instructors who might not have real-world experience. The temperature seemed to drop. Jessica's smile remained, but her breathing shifted, deeper, more controlled. "Look at your regular instructor," Brad continued dismissively. "Sweet girl, probably knows textbook moves. But if you were really in trouble, life or death violence, do you think someone like her could teach you what you'd need?" But Jessica had been cataloging Brad's weaknesses since he walked through the door. 30 women sat frozen between loyalty to Jessica and uncomfortable possibility that Brad might be right. He looked dangerous. Jessica looked fragile. "You know what?" Brad's voice took on manufactured inspiration. "I think we need a demonstration. Something to show you the difference between fantasy and reality." What came next would prove that some reflexes are burned so deep that retirement can never erase them. But what they didn't realize about this quiet instructor would shock everyone in that academy. Because behind Jessica's gentle smile lay training that had cost the U.S. military millions of dollars and had never failed. Jessica looked around at her students' faces, women who trusted her, who came to feel safer. She could see doubt creeping in, Brad's words planting uncertainty about everything she'd taught. "I appreciate the offer, Brad," Jessica said quietly, "but I don't think a demonstration would be helpful." Brad's laugh was sharp and mocking. "See? This is exactly what I'm talking about, ladies. When push comes to shove, your instructor backs down." Because what Brad mistook for fear was actually Jessica calculating exactly how to end this without seriously hurting him. Women began exchanging glances, whispering, "Maybe he has a point. She does seem..." "He's probably right." "Look," Brad continued, warming to his performance, "I'm trying to save your lives. In the real world, bad guys don't follow rules. They don't tap out." He moved around the room, body language becoming more aggressive. They're bigger, stronger, and they've been in more fights than your instructor has seen in movies. What they didn't understand was that Jessica was weighing options, considering every possible outcome. Jessica felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years, the cold feeling of pre-combat assessment. Her mind automatically cataloged Brad's movement patterns, his preferred stance. Old protocols activated without conscious thought. "Tell you what," Brad said, stopping directly in front of Jessica. "Let's make this educational. Just a friendly sparring match to show these ladies what happens when training meets reality." The room fell completely silent. 30 pairs of eyes waited. What they were about to witness would defy everything they thought they understood about strength. "I don't think that's necessary," Jessica replied, her voice steady despite her heart rate automatically adjusting to combat parameters. "Come on!" Brad pressed, his voice getting louder. "Just a quick demonstration. I promise I'll go easy on you." That was when Jessica made her decision. Not because of Brad's taunts, but because she looked at her students and saw women beginning to doubt their own strength. She'd spent 3 years building their confidence. Brad was destroying it in minutes. What happened next would prove that some people choose not to show their true capabilities for very good reasons. "Okay," Jessica said quietly. "If you think it would be educational." Brad's grin became predatory. "Excellent. Don't worry, ladies. I'll make this quick." As Jessica moved to the center of the mat, something fundamental shifted. The transformation was subtle, in how she carried her shoulders, in her breathing rhythm, in the way her eyes had gone completely still. Because what they couldn't see was that Jessica Williams had just stopped being a self-defense instructor and become something else entirely. What they discovered about Jessica's true abilities in the next few seconds would destroy every assumption they had. What the Academy witnessed next defied everything they thought they understood about physics, about fighting, and about what the human body could do. In 15 seconds, Brad Morrison would learn why some people choose not to show their true capabilities. Jessica centered herself, her breathing becoming deeper and rhythmic. Around the room, 30 women held their breath, sensing something was about to happen. Brad bounced on his toes, rolling shoulders and cracking knuckles in obvious intimidation. Remember, ladies, this is what happens when theory meets reality. What the women witnessed wasn't just self-defense. It was art perfected in the world's most dangerous places. "Ready when you are, Jessica," Brad said, settling into what he thought was an intimidating fighting stance. Jessica simply stood there, perfectly upright, arms at her sides, looking like she was waiting for a bus rather than preparing for combat. "Any time now," Brad taunted, "unless you want to admit—" He never finished the sentence. Brad launched forward with a textbook right cross, putting his full body weight behind it. Fast, technically sound, delivered with enough force to knock out most people. It never came close to landing. But what they didn't understand was that Jessica was reading Brad's intentions before he knew what he was going to do. Jessica moved like smoke. Her head slipped the punch by millimeters, her body angling just enough to let Brad's fist slice through empty air. The movement was so economical that several observers weren't sure she'd moved at all. Brad stumbled, his momentum carrying him past his target. His eyes widened in confusion. That punch should have connected. "Lucky dodge," he muttered, resetting his stance. "Won't happen twice." He was wrong. Brad tried a combination, jab, cross, hook. Each punch thrown with increasing desperation, with growing confusion about how none were finding their mark. What the women were seeing was muscle memory from missions that would remain classified for 50 years. Jessica moved like water flowing around stones. Every attack found nothing but air. She never looked rushed, never seemed off balance, never appeared to exert effort. It was as if she could see each strike coming seconds before Brad knew what he was throwing. Around the room, the atmosphere shifted from excitement to something approaching awe. Even women with no fighting knowledge could see they were witnessing something extraordinary. "Stand still and fight!" Brad snarled, throwing increasingly wild combinations. But Jessica wasn't fighting, not in any way Brad understood. She was demonstrating something far more sophisticated. Perfect defensive positioning, flawless distance management, understanding of movement that transcended conventional martial arts. Little did Brad know that the woman avoiding his attacks had once taken out entire enemy squads using nothing but her bare hands. After 30 seconds of missing everything, Brad was breathing hard. Sweat beaded his forehead. His technique deteriorating as frustration took over. Jessica looked like she'd finished a leisurely walk. "What are you doing?" Brad gasped. "Fight back!" "I am fighting," Jessica replied calmly. "I'm just choosing how." That was when Brad made his final fatal mistake. Dropping low, he shot forward in a wrestling takedown, the move that had won him matches in his amateur career. It was exactly the wrong technique against exactly the wrong person. As Brad shot forward, Jessica did something that seemed to violate physics. Instead of defending against the takedown, she stepped into it. Her hands found the back of Brad's head and shoulders, and using a technique that looked almost gentle, she guided his momentum downward while stepping aside at precisely the right moment. Brad crashed face first into the mat with a sound that echoed through the silent academy. The room erupted in gasps and shocked whispers. Brad lay still, stunned not just by impact but by the complete impossibility of what had happened. Because the truth about Jessica's movements wasn't just impressive, it was impossible. Unless you knew that every technique she'd used had been perfected in Afghanistan's mountains, where hesitation meant death and precision meant survival. But what they didn't understand was that Jessica was still holding back, using maybe 10% of what she was truly capable of. And they were about to discover that their quiet instructor had a past that would redefine everything. Brad pushed himself up, staring at Jessica with confusion and dawning recognition that something was very wrong with his understanding of the situation. "How did you do that?" he asked, shaking his head. Jessica extended her hand to help him up, a gesture that made what had just happened even more incomprehensible. Around the room, 30 women sat in stunned silence. What they'd witnessed challenged every assumption they'd made about physical confrontations, about size advantages, about what was possible. "I don't understand," whispered Maria, a nurse. She didn't even look like she was trying. Jessica helped Brad to his feet, then stepped back to respectful distance. Her breathing was still normal, her hair barely mussed. She looked exactly as she had 15 minutes earlier, calm, composed, utterly unassuming. Brad looked like he'd been hit by a truck. "That's impossible," Brad muttered. "You're just a fitness instructor, a woman. You can't—" He trailed off, unable to articulate what had happened to his worldview. "I am a fitness instructor," Jessica agreed quietly. "And I am a woman. But I'm also someone who learned long ago that the strongest people are often those who choose not to demonstrate their strength." She turned to her students, who were staring with expressions ranging from amazement to reverence. "What you just saw isn't about me being special," Jessica continued. "It's about understanding that real self-defense isn't about overpowering someone. It's about using physics, leverage, and timing." "But how did you learn to do that?" asked Sarah, the college freshman. "Where does someone even learn to move like that?" Jessica hesitated for just a moment, so briefly most wouldn't have noticed. "I've had some training," she said simply. It was technically true, in the same way saying the sun is somewhat warm is accurate. Brad was still shaking his head. "No, that wasn't just some training. I've been doing this 15 years. What you just did wasn't normal." That was when the doors opened again and Colonel Sarah Mitchell walked in. At 45, Colonel Mitchell carried herself with unmistakable military bearing. Her civilian clothes couldn't disguise the ramrod posture, the way her eyes automatically swept the room upon entry. She was there to pick up her daughter Emma, as she did every Tuesday. But what she walked into would trigger recognition patterns burned into her memory from 20 years of military service. She saw Brad Morrison, disheveled and confused. She saw 30 women sitting in stunned silence. And she saw a young woman standing perfectly still, breathing in a pattern Colonel Mitchell recognized from her own advanced combat training. What happened next would change how these women saw strength, courage, and what it really meant to be a warrior. What happened when Colonel Mitchell recognized those deadly techniques proved that some legends never truly disappear. What she whispered next would reveal that Jessica wasn't just any veteran. She was the ghost. Colonel Mitchell's eyes swept the scene, taking in the positioning of everyone, the obvious tension, and most importantly, the way the young instructor was standing, perfectly balanced, completely relaxed, but with alertness that screamed military training of the highest caliber. "Emma," she called to her daughter, "is everything all right here?" "Mom," Emma jumped up, "you just missed the most incredible thing. Jessica just—" She stopped as Colonel Mitchell held up a hand, her attention now completely focused on Jessica. The colonel's expression had shifted from casual parental interest to something much more intense. "Excuse me," Colonel Mitchell said, addressing Jessica directly. "Could I ask you something?" Jessica turned to face the colonel, and for just a moment, their eyes met in a way that spoke volumes. Military to military. Warrior to warrior. "Of course," Jessica replied, but her voice had changed subtly. Still polite, but something else there now, the sound of someone speaking to a fellow service member. Colonel Mitchell stepped closer. "That defensive positioning you were using, the way you moved, could you tell me where you learned that?" The room went even quieter. Everyone could sense something significant was happening. "I've had some military training," Jessica said carefully. "What branch?" "Army." "What unit?" Jessica hesitated longer this time. "I'd rather not say." Colonel Mitchell nodded slowly, understanding. "Those weren't regular Army techniques. That was something else entirely." She paused, studying Jessica's face. "Special operations?" "Ma'am, I really can't—" "The way you moved your hands when you redirected his momentum," Colonel Mitchell interrupted. "I've only seen that technique in classified training manuals. There are maybe 50 people in the world who know how to do what you just did." The colonel stepped closer. "What was your MOS?" Jessica's composure finally cracked slightly. "Ma'am, I'm not comfortable discussing 11B, 18A." Colonel Mitchell's voice got more insistent. "Or something that doesn't officially exist?" The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Every woman watched, fascinated by this military interrogation they didn't understand, but could sense was monumentally important. Finally, Jessica spoke, barely above a whisper. "I was with the 75th Ranger Regiment initially. Then, other assignments." Colonel Mitchell's eyes widened slightly. "Other assignments? You mean—" "I mean assignments I can't discuss, ma'am." That was when Colonel Mitchell's expression shifted from professional curiosity to something approaching awe. "Jesus Christ," she breathed. "You're her. You're the ghost." The name hit the room like a physical force. Even women with no military background could hear the reverence, the recognition, the sheer disbelief in Colonel Mitchell's voice. Because sometimes the most dangerous people in the world choose to spend their days teaching others how to protect themselves. What Jessica Williams had hidden for 3 years was about to transform not just how these women saw her, but how they saw themselves. The room had gone so quiet you could hear fluorescent lights humming overhead. 30 women sat transfixed, beginning to understand they were in the presence of something far more extraordinary than they'd ever imagined. Colonel Mitchell's voice carried absolute certainty. The youngest recipient of the Navy Cross in 20 years. The soldier who single-handedly saved an entire Marine unit while wounded. The operator who disappeared from public view right after the ceremony. Jessica's shoulders sagged slightly, the burden of maintaining her cover finally becoming too heavy to bear. "You walked away from a Medal of Honor recommendation," Colonel Mitchell continued. "The Pentagon wanted to make you the poster child for women in combat. You could have had any assignment, any future you chose." "I chose this," Jessica said quietly, gesturing around the room at her students. "I chose to help people who actually need it." Brad Morrison, who had been standing frozen since Colonel Mitchell began speaking, finally found his voice. "You're saying she's some kind of war hero?" "Not some kind," Colonel Mitchell replied. "The kind. The ghost isn't just a nickname, it's a legend. Enemy forces in Afghanistan used to whisper stories about an American operator who could appear anywhere, eliminate any target, and vanish without a trace." She turned to address the room full of women, who were now looking at their quiet instructor with completely different eyes. "The woman who's been teaching you self-defense for the past year is one of the most lethal human beings on the planet. She's killed more enemy combatants than most entire units. And she chose to retire at 24 to teach women's self-defense classes, Jessica added with a wry smile. Because that's where I could actually make a difference. Sarah raised her hand tentatively. So when my boyfriend said I couldn't learn anything useful here? Your boyfriend is an idiot, Colonel Mitchell said bluntly. You've been learning from someone who could take out a room full of trained soldiers without breaking a sweat. Brad stepped forward, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by humility. I owe you an apology, he said to Jessica. A massive one. I thought I was teaching these women about reality, but I was just being an asshole. He turned to face the class. Ladies, I came in thinking I knew what strength looked like. I thought it was about size, aggression, domination. I was wrong about everything. He gestured toward Jessica. Real strength is what she's been showing you all along. It's not about hurting people, it's about protecting them. Jessica smiled, the first genuinely warm expression since the ordeal began. Thank you, Brad. That means a lot. Mike, could you teach me? Brad asked, looking almost embarrassed. I thought I knew how to fight, but what you did, I've never seen anything like it. I'd be happy to, Jessica replied. But first, understand something. The techniques I use today, they're not about fighting. They're about ending fights as quickly and safely as possible. Colonel Mitchell checked her watch. I hate to break this up, but Emma and I need to get going. But Jessica, she pulled out a business card. If you ever decide you want to come back to service, you call me. Jessica took the card. Thank you, Colonel, but I think I'm exactly where I need to be. As Colonel Mitchell and Emma left, she turned back one more time. Ladies, you have no idea how lucky you are. The woman teaching you has skills most special operations soldiers would kill to learn. But more than that, she has wisdom to know that the greatest victory is the one that doesn't require violence. After they left, the room remained quiet for several minutes. Finally, Sarah spoke up. So, same time next week? Jessica laughed, a sound of pure joy that filled the space. Same time next week. But now you know, when I tell you that you're stronger than you think, I'm not just being encouraging, I'm telling you the truth. As the women filed out, chattering excitedly about what they'd witnessed, Jessica began putting away equipment. Ordinary work performed by someone who was anything but ordinary. Someone who had chosen to use extraordinary skills in service of something simple but profound, helping other people feel safe in the world. Thank you to everyone who typed respect. Your support honors every veteran who continues to serve in ways both seen and unseen. Jessica Williams chose to use her incredible skills not for fame or recognition, but to empower others to protect themselves. Subscribe for more stories that remind us why we must never judge a book by its cover. And remember that the strongest warriors often choose to walk among us as teachers, protectors, and quiet heroes. Until next time, remember that true strength is not about what you can do. It's about choosing when and why to do it.